Coming up on F'ing Up the Ineffable.
So when we talk about a chatbot, the inputs are much, much larger, though. What we're training it on is not just a set of controls and a little bit of what it sees. You're training it on, essentially the entire context of all the text that exists on the internet, or, something like that, where it gets these patterns that it builds, based on what other people have written. So, I mean, and there are obviously some copyright issues that have come up in many cases because there is a lot of copywritten material that is used to train these bots, whether it be, books or, manuscripts or music or art or whatever. But that being said,
I like how you differentiated between books and art. Makes me feel much better about it.
Well, I meant
about my art, Michael. Makes me feel much better about my art.
Yeah, I meant real art, not
The man has jokes. So anyway,
right. So first of all, you have so much more input.
hello everyone. I'm Brian.
And I'm Mike. We're experts in some things, such as IT, which we'll probably never discuss.
We're published authors with over 20 books.
Wait, we are? Which ones did I write?
We're musicians who played on albums and TV.
And developers who have written software used by literally millions of people.
Wait, really? I have?
Over the years, we have had in-depth conversations about everything from theoretical physics
To the nature of consciousness.
to why Marvel is way better than DC.
Is it though?
And we thought maybe you'd like to listen in. Trust us, we're really interesting people. And smart.
And don't forget good looking.
And we're effing up the ineffable.
All right, folks. Well, we're back, and we're going to discuss AI this week, which is a topic I think we've both been fairly interested in. I mean, it's kind of impacting both of our jobs, I think, and
Well, that and it's everywhere. Like you can't see an ad anywhere without somebody telling you that now their product is powered by AI.
you can't even fucking search Google anymore without getting inundated by AI or,
Well, you're right.
Bing or anything else.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like it's in a search. It's in like, and I kind of hate that I'm kind of becoming, I don't want to say dependent on it, but I'm actually using it more than I would like to, because I do a search and often I'm searching for how to do something in PowerShell, and AI usually gives me a pretty good starting point.
Yeah, and it's pretty good. But I mean, even recently, I remember doing searches where, you get the AI blurb at the top when you do a Google search that's supposed to answer your question, and it would just have blatant incorrect, facts in what my search was. I wish I could remember the exact example, but it just said, definitively, it's like trying to gaslight me, right? It's like, this is ABC, and I'm like, no, it's not, So, I mean, it's certainly not perfect.
Yeah, I would say as far as like being able to use any of the code examples it gives me, it's probably Mendoza line or below. Like it's bad. It's maybe 20% of the time it works, but it usually gives me an idea of kind of where to start. So,
it's like a template for you to.
Well, not really that. It's more like I don't usually when I'm Googling something to do in PowerShell, I have no idea like what commandlets I need to use or anything. Like I'm completely clueless, and it'll at least give me, oh, okay, so there's these 3 commandlets I need to look up and figure out, if those do it. But yeah, it hallucinates a lot even there. Anyway. That's what we're going to talk about. That's a very, very long-winded intro. And I just wanted to mention we're doing this podcast on Easter weekend 2025, which is quite a long break from the last one we recorded. I don't remember when it was, but it was last year sometime. And lots of things have happened since then. So there might be some discussion which does not involve AI that ends up falling into this, and it just is what it is. The world is in the state that the world is in. So you know.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's enough things that are happening in our lives, whether it be the economy or politics or whatever, that it's hard not to creep itself into a lot of conversations. And I think you and I both have very definitive opinions about that. And I don't think either one of us are trying to shove those opinions down anybody's throat, but at the same time, you can't just ignore them. So,
That is true. Yeah, it's so I don't know how much it's going to bleed in, but I figured I would mention it just in case. I'd hate to blindside people with anything political that might happen to pop in.
yeah.
But
So AI, right? Artificial intelligence. Right. So I just want to start here. Like, I know you've got a lot of experience. You've done a lot of research, probably a lot more than I have for certain. I think there are some areas in which I've got some expertise, but I think that you probably have a much broader knowledge of AI in general. Um, but like when I think of AI, it's easy for me to go back to like the first thoughts of AI. Like, and I don't mean something like ChatGPT or anything like that. I'm thinking back to like video games because what was really
I'm thinking
common,
back to Eliza, actually.
Eliza. I don't know Eliza.
You remember Eliza? Eliza was it was the AI therapist. It was based.
Oh no, that was Doctor something that came with
Well,
my
that was
Sound Blaster.
That was Dr. Spatzo, but that was
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
based
yeah.
on Eliza.
Oh, okay, right.
So-
Yeah, well that was an app that was kind of like a chat bot that came with my Sound Blaster sound card in like 1992, 3, something like that. So, yeah, so I mean it goes back that far certainly, but I always think of when we talk about AI, like I would think about it in games, and you'd think about how you had to program the response for your NPCs in the game, whether it be Space Invaders, and they have a very specific little marching order that they take, which there's no intelligence whatsoever there, right? It just follows a path. But as games have gotten more complex, a lot of times the logic behind what your NPCs or enemies or whatever would do in those games started following something like rules that they would follow. It was less about following an exact path or an exact pattern, but instead it would be, we've joked about this in the past, but it was a series of if-then statements, right? I mean, that's what AI used to be, was if this condition, then do this. But if it's different, then do something different. And, that was the state of what most people would call AI for, I would say, a really long time, up until we started hitting the new wave of generative AI. It was a series of if-then statements. Well, and I kind of skipped over the whole machine learning and neural networks, and that's part of it. We can probably talk more about that as well. But I think for most people, when you thought of AI, it was just a series of if-then statements that got progressively more complex as as we continued to build and advance and improve.
Yeah, and I think I think people tend to look at that as being less advanced or less I don't know, less like actual intelligence than what we're doing with neural networks, which is probably true, but it kind of minimizes the impact some of those systems had. I mean, expert systems are essentially just that. They're just layered if then statements. I mean, I think even Deep Blue was built off of a similar kind of system. I don't think it used the modern type of neural network. So I would say you can go pretty far with that stuff. The problem with it is that it doesn't really work well for anything in which there are an infinite number of possibilities. Like, the larger the possibility space, the longer it takes you to build a system like that. And at some point pretty much at any point, you get basically it's going to take you longer to build the system than it would take to run through all the possibilities, which means if you want to build a system that took everything into account, you're never going to get there because it takes an infinite amount of time to go through, an infinite amount of possibilities. Basically.
Well, exactly. And it becomes impossible to build, something that does certain things. I mean, if you look at today's modern Gen AI systems like ChatGPT or Gemini or anything like that, you can't build something like that with an if then statement. That you can't possibly anticipate everything that anybody could ever type in as a prompt in order to know how to respond to that. So you have to have a different model for how to deal with those types
Though
of
most
inputs.
chatbots actually did work like that for a very long time.
Oh
Like,
yeah, they would look for keywords or
yep.
certain entities within the prompt and would just essentially be triggered off of those particular keywords. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it's. I think a second problem with that is getting to something that we would call intelligence with that type of AI. Uh, basic, basically, it requires that you understand how the thing you're trying to emulate thinks. So if you're trying to do something that can correspond with you like a human being can, you have to understand how a human being thinks in order to be able to program that with any kind of fidelity. I mean, you can pretend, by saying, well, if they're asking this question, what are they thinking about? What do I think they're thinking about? And then how would I respond?
Mm-hmm.
Then you can build something that kind of emulates that. But if you wanted to get down, like if you wanted to do what they call hard AI or strong AI, with that kind of a system, then you actually have to understand at a very low level how the thing you're trying to emulate thinks.
Well, to give a good example, think of like chess and the chess bots that exist. You know, you to describe what you're talking about, to do it in that traditional method, you literally have to be a chess grandmaster yourself in order to program a chess bot to play like you do. But then it only is going to play like you do. It
Right.
doesn't learn anything else. It doesn't learn other strategies that are by other grandmasters or other
Yep.
things like that. It is limited only by the knowledge of the person who's creating it.
And even if you put, say you took 10 grandmasters and they all programmed it with all their own little tips and tricks, like at no point does it know which is the best in a given situation. Like it has none of that data. It has none of that judgment, that
Right.
that an actual grandmaster would have. It has an if then statement which tells it to go one way or the other. Or if you want to get probabilistic with it, it could be, 50% of the time do this and 50% of the time do that. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? But that's still not, what you would call a decision. It's a flipping a coin, So all of those old school styles of programming AI, they don't really match what you're seeing with Chat GPT for a number of reasons. But the biggest one is just that what we're doing with Chat GPT is both kind of simpler and less understandable than what we're doing with like a branching if statement.
Right. So ChatGPT and a lot of generative AI is based on essentially a neural network, right? So maybe we should talk just a little bit about what a neural network is and how that works. So and I'll start, but you may be able to plug in more details than I can. But essentially a neural network starts with you have a series of inputs and you have an output. And that output is either going to move you closer to what you want out of a output or not. And you have a bunch of nodes or neurons basically that exist in multiple layers that are in between the inputs and the outputs, that honestly a neural network tries a bunch of random shit to see what happens, right? So one of a great example that I've seen recently that I just think is fascinating is there's this video game called Trackmania where it's all about trying to, you're competing on these tracks against people all over the world, and everybody's trying to get that extra hundredth of a second to beat a particular track against other people. And I've seen a lot of videos where people will program an AI to learn how to drive a car on those tracks. And they will give it as inputs all of the different buttons that you would press. So your accelerator, your brake, your left and right steering, there's a handbrake in the game, and other, any of the things that you can possibly press. And then it essentially gives it a carrot or a cookie if you make it past certain checkpoints. So obviously, it scores how well it's doing against how far you get along the track.
Right.
So what's really interesting is that it keeps going through these iterations where, let's just say one iteration, it's going to do some really random stuff and it's not going to do well. After 10 iterations, each time, out of those 10, it may have made it a little further along the track than the one before. So it's going to use that as a baseline. Each one of those nodes that's in between the inputs and the outputs are essentially little knobs that can get turned that adjust slightly how often you use that input, what it does, how it's going to affect the next node down the line, and so on. So it starts learning as it goes through iteration after iteration, hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of iterations. It starts learning what combinations of those things that it can do that will get it the highest score, if you will, as it moves further down the track. So eventually you give it other success criteria, right? Instead of it being just get down the track, it's get down the track quickly, because that's the whole point of this game is you don't want to just complete the track. You want to try to do it at a very, optimally, I guess is the right way to say it. So watching through that and how it does it, and what's fascinating, and this is the part, it's almost like emergent behavior. A lot of people will see this and think of it as being almost intelligent, is that in doing this and doing it hundreds of thousands of times, it may come up with strategies on how to do that thing that people haven't thought of yet.
Right.
So it ends up, and it's purely because it's, I think of, and I don't know if you saw like the last couple of Avengers movies, but there's one part in Infinity War where Doctor Strange says he looks into the future of there's 4 billion different futures that he looks at, and there's only one future in which such and such works, right? No spoilers, but the movie's old, so get over it. But it's kind of like that, it's like, okay, it's not that it's so smart that it has figured out how to do these things that people haven't figured out. It's that we as people, it takes us a long time to adjust and adapt and to get creative and try different things, where this is legitimately just randomly trying anything that's possible. And when it finds things that work, it latches onto that. It says, hey, this got me a little higher score or more cookies or however you want to put it. So it learns from that, but it doesn't learn. It adjusts its algorithm to that, right? So it's not so much, there's no intelligence to it still. It's just that it has.
Well, so this kind of brings up an interesting question about what exactly is intelligence, because, and what exactly is learning. I mean, there's so much to unpack from what you just talked about, but that's the thing that struck me immediately is it's like, how do you define that? I would still call that learning. I mean, I would still call that, you've discovered knowledge, therefore you've learned something. I would say it learns, but it doesn't. I don't know that it really has any relevance to the way we learn. It may be a completely different way of learning than what we do. Because I'm not a neurologist or a neuroscientist, so I can't really talk about this intelligently. But what I understand about how the brain works is that it's not necessarily the neurons themselves that are so powerful. It's that the neurons are so hyper connected to other neurons. And this is kind of why with human creativity, you can have something that seems completely unrelated jog your memory about something else. And then you can make a connection that you've never made before. That, oh, wait a minute, this thing kind of works like this other thing, and therefore maybe if I do this, it'll work,
Right.
And the AI doesn't seem to work in that same fashion, mostly because the neurons in their neural network aren't nearly as connected as the neurons are in our brain, just from, computational reasons. But what it's doing instead is basically trying every possibility there is, Like it's just
Right.
it's
Yeah.
just trying it doesn't pass judgment on whether something is good or bad. It just uses it and says, did that get me there? No. And part of the reason it can do this and do it so fast is because it's doing it in a non-destructive environment. It's doing it in an environment where a mistake doesn't cost it anything.
Exactly. It can repeat it a million times,
Right.
and it doesn't hurt anything. It's
Whereas
just
for
all
us,
data.
if we decide that, hey, maybe if I jump out of this window and flap my arms really, really hard, I can fly, that's a mistake I only get to make one time.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So, and this kind of leads to another kind of worry where if you look at, rogue AI, you look at AI escaping into the wild or whatever and doing something crazy. Really, the thing I think you have to worry about is that unless it's explicitly taught that things operate differently out in the real world, it's just going to try everything. And there's some things that you only get to try once,
Right. So I do think that, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but I think there's a big leap from what we're talking about with, a video game or Chat GPT to when we talk about AI escaping, air quotes, into the real world. I don't think it's a huge leap, but it is like a chatbot is not going to do that. You know what I mean? It's your chatbot is not connected to like the nuclear arsenal. We don't have that problem where you're it's going to say, I wonder what happens if I press this button. But that being said, how far away are we from that? I want to talk about that. But I do want to kind of close the loop on, how does that neural network turn into something like, Gen AI, whether it be for a chatbot or for a, image generation or, any number of other Gen AI tools. How does that neural network turn into that? And
Well, I think that's actually fairly simple. Like it really just comes down to what are you training the AI on? Like what are your goals, and what is the inputs that you're feeding the AI? Like take Gen AI for writing, which is in my wheelhouse because I really don't think it's very useful for writing, and I don't think it's ever really going to be very useful for writing, except for shit no one actually wants to write, like news. Like, and I'm not saying there aren't reporters that don't want to write long form stories for the news. And I'm not saying that's not valuable. It is in certain cases, but I would say the news that we're most accustomed to consuming these days is more like a quick read. Like nobody has any kind
if you're
of
looking for a series of facts that have been put into prose form, Gen AI can be really good at doing that.
Yep.
But if you're looking for some sort of investigative report that's going to require some nuance or analysis or other things, it's not going to be so good.
right.
At that. Right.
Anything that requires judgment, it just can't do. Like judgment requires a set of values and principles that are ingrained into whatever, I'm just going to say consciousness, even though I don't necessarily know that that's required. I would just say you have to have a set of values and principles
Yeah.
that you're evaluating things by. Now, I don't know that you couldn't train an AI. Maybe you can. I don't know. I think it's a much more complicated AI though than what we've got now. What we've got now, all Gen AI does essentially is figure out what next component to put into the composition to make it closer to what we're trying to get to. So, for writing, this is really easy. It's autocorrect on steroids. It's
Right.
what is the next word that comes after this word most of the time.
Right. So when we think about something like a chatbot and you compare it to the neural network that I described with the racing game, right? You have the inputs for that racing game. What we're training it on is essentially, and I did leave part out, but it's essentially all the controls you can use, and then like what you can see. For example, how far is the wall in front of you, and what is the track made out of, and is it curving to the right or left, and all that other kind of stuff, right? So you have all these inputs, and then you have the controls. That's what you're training it on, right? So, and it learns from all of that. So when we talk about a chatbot, the inputs are much, much larger though. What we're training it on is not just a set of controls and a little bit of what it sees. You're training it on, essentially the entire context of all the text that exists on the internet, or, something like that, where it gets these patterns that it builds, uh, based on what other people have written. So, I mean, and there are obviously some copyright issues that have come up in many cases, because there is a lot of copywritten material that is used to train these bots, whether it be, books, or, manuscripts, or music, or art, or whatever. Um, but that being
I
said,
like how you differentiated between books and art. Makes me feel much better about
well, I meant
about my art, Michael. Makes me feel much better about my art.
yeah, I meant real art, not
The man has jokes. So anyway,
right. So first of all, you have so much more input to that. And then second of all, and they call it a large language model that sits behind it. And there are a couple of different things. LLMs are one of the ways in which they work, and it's probably the most popular way, but there are some other models that exist. I know we don't want to get too deep into all the technical details of that, but just where we were describing all of those nodes that exist, they exist in layers, right? So, your typical, like the neural network that I was talking about that I was using for that Trackmania game, I want to say it had like 5 layers of nodes, and there might have been something like a total of 30 nodes or something like that. Not a huge number, right? Each node takes a certain amount of computational power for it to process this in real time. So when you talk about large language models, suddenly you're talking about, instead of being 30 nodes across maybe 5 layers of these knobs that it twists in order to figure things out, now what you're talking about is millions of layers with millions of nodes on each layer. And then just to kind of blow my mind, I watched this video. It was from 3 Blue 1 Brown. I don't know if you've ever seen any videos from them, where they were talking about how this works. And it's not only, we think of layers as, two-dimensional. You put one on top of another and you're only stacking up. Well, these layers go in something like 16 million dimensions as well. So it's this huge number that we can't even fathom as people, right? But the thing is, every meaning of every word gets parsed into these tokens, and tokens have all of these numbers that are associated with them that kind of give it some sort of semantic meaning. Like, it's like taking the actual meaning and encoding it in some kind of number, right? And then when somebody types in a prompt, it takes and reads that meaning, comparing it to all the other words that are around it, runs it through this neural network, and just like you described with autocorrect on steroids, it comes up with this list of the best next words to use. There might be a dozen or even more that have sufficient probability that it should come up next. And depending on how, and again, I'm using air quotes, how creative you want to let the model be, it can either use always the top one, or maybe it's one of the top 5, or maybe you bounce, or you weight it and come back with something so that it doesn't always tell you the same thing. But it really is just autocorrect. It's just using that trained data to say, okay, in 92% of the text that I've brought in as input as the training for this model, the next word that I should say is white, and then let's just say in 6% of it it's pale. So it will just figure out that, and then it computes it for the next token or next word, and so on, until it strings together a bunch of words that sound like it's really smart. It sounds like it knows what it's talking about, but all it's really doing is crunching a bunch of numbers of the semantic meanings of all of the tokens based, that you entered.
yep.
So, yeah.
I think there's a couple things that happen here that I think shouldn't get glossed over. Like, the first one is how impressive it appears, and I just want to kind of tackle this with the car game analogy you were talking about. So this is a really good one, because all you're presenting the actual AI with is what a person would see on the screen, right? And the controls, okay? But a person looking at that does all kinds of things. First of all, we process all that visual information, and we I don't want to say tokenize because that's the word they use, but we obfuscate. Well, not obfuscate it. We relate it to something else. It's a proxy for something else. So when we see the black ribbon thing on the ground, that's tarmac. That's the road. Clearly
Right.
to us, that's where we're supposed to drive. When we see the red and white things on the side, clearly to us, that's the barriers or the edge of the tarmac, right? And then the green stuff on the side, well, that's grass. And the blue stuff in the distance, that's background, right? And the little red thing that's running around, that's the car. And the blue and black things that we're passing, those are other cars, right? We have concepts of all of those things.
Right.
They mean something. So they're symbols. They mean so much more to us in our mind than what we see on the screen. We make them something they're not, right? The computer doesn't have any of that. So we're tempted when we see the computer complete that game to say, well, the computer knows how to drive a car now, right? The computer understands that's a car and that's a road and that's grass and that's the distance and that's an obstacle and it understands all these. No, it doesn't understand any of that shit. It literally knows nothing about what that stuff is. So it's for us as we get really impressed by this. We look at this and say, look at all this shit it just figured out all on its own. It didn't figure out anything. All it knows is that it gets a cookie when it gets to the end, and it gets smacked on the hand when it doesn't get to the end, and therefore it does the things that get it to the end.
Exactly.
You know?
Right.
And it's doing that with everything. That's all Gen AI. So when you're talking with a chatbot, and it seems to come back with something prescient or something that seems, oh, I really never thought about it like that, and that's, gosh, this thing it's like a real person or whatever. You need to be aware that that's not what it's doing at all. Like the only reason it's coming back with something that sounds like it's got some kind of insight is because somewhere along the line, a human being wrote some shit that had some insight and it just bogarted it and spat it right back out at you, So it's very easy to read into these things a capability that they don't actually possess. And you end up you end up thinking we're much closer to what we're trying to get to than we actually are.
Right. And the same thing, not just chatbots, but you think about like image generation. I know you've used Midjourney a lot, but Flux, and I mean, there's so many now, Stable Diffusion, there's a bunch of them that are out there now, but it's easy to think of them as if they work differently because you're like, well, this isn't just autocorrect, like it's creating an image, but it's literally autocorrect on a pixel level. You know, I mean, it's literally just trying to figure out what color to make the next pixel based on all of that trained data. And it's really good at it. And you can make it create pictures of things that you would have a difficult time going and just finding on the internet. Let's just say Will Smith holding a banana, because you know what? It's easy to find pictures of Will Smith and it's easy to find pictures of a banana and it's easy to find pictures of people holding things.
Right.
So, it's pretty easy for it to use that context to come up with something that makes sense for that. But then if you go and try to give it, let's just say some, more obscure animal like a Komodo dragon, and then you want it to do something with, suddenly there's not nearly as many pictures that has been fed of Komodo dragons as it has been Will Smith. Right. So now it's suddenly having a difficult time accurately representing a Komodo dragon because of that.
Right.
You see a lot of that. It doesn't understand what a Komodo dragon or Will Smith or a banana is. It's just looking at what the next pixel should be based on its training data.
Right. And that functionality actually brings to head a lot of kind of, I don't know, sociological issues. Like, for example, I use Gen AI for images mostly to generate ad copy for my ads on Facebook and stuff for my books. Well, I've tried a gazillion times to get ChatGPT or really Midjourney to get it to produce a good image of my protagonist from my Parada Cult Mystery series, who is mostly, I mean, he's a partially Native American, partially Maori, but he looks Native American, like a
Right.
big Native American. And I swear to God, it is hard to get ChatGPT not to do something just borderline racist when you're
Right.
doing this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Headdress
Yeah,
and all this kind of
like
stuff. Yeah.
it's just like, no, that's not what I want. Somebody who's from that ethnicity dressed in a suit looks
Right.
nice. You know
Yes.
what I'm saying? And it's like, no, we're gonna put he's gonna be in the old west, or
Right. And again, it's because of the training data,
Right.
right? And it's very difficult to generate things that there's not a lot of training data for. So, it's still based on everything that it can be fed. And I heard something recently that I thought was really interesting. We keep finding new ways to use Gen AI, but we've almost run out of training data to give Gen AI.
we have to start training it on other Gen AI.
Well, and that presents its own
Yes,
difficulties
it does.
because then you have something
Garbage in,
hallucinate.
garbage out.
Exactly. But I think that's interesting because we can look at how far something like these chatbots or image generation or even video generation tools have come just in the last like 4 or 5 years. But I think it's easy for us to say, well, wow, where will it be in the next 5 years? Well, the truth is, it's probably not going to be that much better. I mean, it might be a little better, but it's all based on the training data, and we're running out of training data.
Well, it's also, I mean, in my opinion, and I'm not an AI expert by any stretch of the imagination. I do think, I've written a book about this. I've read a lot of books about this. I do think we need to be more than a little. We need to be quite concerned about an AI apocalypse, and not more like the kind I wrote about, not like
Go ahead and plug your book real quick.
Unconstrained is the name of the book. Available on Amazon, but well, on Barnes and Noble too, I guess. But anyway, if you if we wait until we recognize that AI is dangerous to worry about AI being dangerous, we'll have no chance of reining in dangerous AI. Like, AI has to be built more or less from the ground up with the idea that this could get really out of hand really fast. And so I do think we need to be concerned about that. However, I think we're probably never going to get to something that is obviously quote unquote intelligent, in the way we would think about it as a having agency and, defining its own goals and, coming up with creative ways to, I guess, originating its own creative solution to problems. I think we're actually quite a long way from there, because I don't actually see a way of getting there from LLMs, unless with the one possible exception, unless that type of intelligence is emergent.
Well, there's one way that could happen. I'm not saying it's the only way, but I was just thinking about this the other day. We talked about the large language model and how it has, if you're talking about how it's going to respond, it waits the next word that it's going to place, and it's very, I almost want to say predictable, right? So that's what you have today, and again, it's based on the training data, and it's just doing its thing, right? But what we have today is not creative. I mean, to your point, if you try to get it to write a creative story, something that's never been done before, or create an image of something that's never been pictured before, it just literally can't do it. Because it is only working based on its training data. So I was thinking about this and thinking about it kind of the way that genetics work with people today. And you have people that will have, mutations if it's a good mutation, then it gets passed down to that their ancestors and can proliferate. Where if it's a bad mutation, it's particularly something that causes you to die early or be sterile, then it'll never get passed down, right? So if there was some way to introduce mutations to a chatbot or image generation or something like that, in a way that instead of it doing something purely based on its training data, but that it had a way to do something unexpected. Now, again, that's not really creativity. That's again kind of doing
what you're talking about is like is basically rules based data corruption. Really, it's like, yes, we're going to feed you all this data and we're going to have you do this stuff, but then every now and again we're just going to throw a monkey wrench in the works and see what happens.
Well, and you're right, it'd have to be rules based. If it's an LLM and it's trying to respond in a chat bot, then it's like, okay, that there's any sentences have structure, right? You got to fit within that structure, and you got to figure out, okay, there's a subject and a predicate to this sentence, and et cetera, et cetera. There are rules around that, but then you have to have some way, and this is the part that I don't know how you do it yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if we couldn't figure it out soon, is that you have to evaluate that programmatically somehow. So,
well, see, I think this is where the problem comes in, and this is why I don't think I actually. I think what you're talking about is more of a, we get to the nature versus nurture argument, right? What you're talking about is more of a naturalist's way of looking at intelligence, right? Saying essentially, we need some way that kind of mimics genetics because genetics have something to do with our intelligence level, right?
Right.
I don't think that's necessarily wrong, but I don't think that's the big rock. I think if I'm thinking about a human being, right? Because we've talked about this a lot, and we're going to have to do a podcast on this at some point. I don't believe we have free will. I think that's a provable statement, and I think anybody can prove it to themselves. And I think it's obvious once you see it. But we're deterministic creatures. I don't think we're creative either. Okay, what I think happens is we are an organism that every single second of our life involves experience, usually several different layers of experience. And all of that data goes into our brains and gets remembered or not, gets categorized or not, and there are connections made between neurons at widely dispersed portions of our brain for all of the things we experience. And that's happening 24/7, whether we're trying to or not, right? So even when we're not in a learning kind of mode, even when we're not trying to learn, we're just walking outside, right? We're still feeling the sun on our skin and the wind against us, and we're seeing things and we're smelling things and we're wondering things, why does the wind smell like that today? Somebody must be having a cookout somewhere. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. All these kinds of things all these experiences are filtering into our brain 24/7, and we're making connections based on those. And I feel like what we're asking ChatGPT to do, or these AI models to do, is we're saying, okay, you have no senses. You're locked in a room. We're giving you all of the world's reading material. Read it all. And with absolutely nothing else, no sight, no smell, no taste, no touch, no idea what another creature is, no empathy, no emotion, none of that. Try to understand this.
Right. And it's not even, it's not try to understand it. It's perform some very complex math on it.
Right, but
really
I'm saying if we're
down
trying to get to something that actually thinks, that approach I don't think is ever going to work, because and this again, I told you this is probably going to go here. Because this is where my thoughts have gone. This comes back to consciousness. What is consciousness, right? Mm-hmm. And when you're trying to nail that down, when you're trying to say what exactly is consciousness, I again, the best definition I've seen is it's just experience. It's just the act of experiencing things.
Right.
That is consciousness. Well, you can't describe an experience to someone who has never had that experience. There is no level of words that gets you to the point to where that person can understand an experience that is alien to them. You can't talk a blind person who has been blind their whole life into understanding what red is.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And you're right, too. I completely agree with you that we're not going to take a chat bot and somehow turn it into a human or think like a human. I completely agree. But, it's funny. You think about things like self-driving cars that do experience things very unique to being a self-driving car, and how it takes in that data and then uses it to adjust its models on how it performs is something that happens today now. Now, again, it's very specialized. It's not going to start talking to you about the works of Shakespeare. It only knows how to drive. But it is experience those things, and some of the cars that I've seen, and I was really kind of fascinated watching a documentary on this. It's not just like vision, it's not just looking at
so LiDAR and all kind of stuff.
Well, it's that, but it's also like there's sensors on the wheels to determine how much rumble the road has, or if it hits a pothole or something like that, or like there even I think they were talking about like they had something that they were using for 18-wheelers where they could determine how much crosswind there was, because, if you're going on a really windy road, you can see them starting to tip, that sort of thing. I thought that was fascinating. It's getting all this input and using that to build the models for these driving, these vehicles.
See, this is interesting. I would assume, and maybe this is just a bad assumption of me, I don't really know anything about it. I would assume these self-driving AIs are actually more procedural AIs. They're more like the expert system style of AI and less like the neural network, except maybe Tesla's, because, he doesn't actually give a shit whether people die. But everybody else, we actually do care whether or not this thing runs over people, right?
Well, of course. You're right.
Which means you don't want something like, and this is kind of we haven't mentioned this yet, so I'm going to mention, this is kind of the elephant in the room whenever you talk about LLMs. Nobody actually understands how these motherfuckers work. Like it's like quantum physics. Like the people who study it, who make it their life duty to understand this shit, will tell you flat out, if you think you understand it, you don't understand it. Like, because it's not understandable by a human being.
Well, it's just like I was describing earlier. When you get into these LLMs, you're literally talking about these numbers that, like 16 million dimensions of numbers that incorporate a particular semantic meaning for a word in its context. It's crazy. There's no way that any human can wrap your mind around what 16 million dimensions. And just to give you an example, if you just picture, and it's hard to do audio, but if you picture like your XY axis, like when you're in school, it's two dimensions, right? And you can kind of put a point in space and say this is -2, 1, right? You can even go 3 dimensions easily if you go depth, and it's a little hard, right? And it's a little harder to do on paper, but there are plenty of CAD programs or other things like that where you can do that. Now add 16 million more dimensions to that, not just the length of the X, Y, and Z axis or anything, but actually somehow
it's hard to even conceptualize.
Exactly.
It's hard to even wrap your mind about. Like people do it in mathematics because that's about the only way you can actually understand it in any kind of logical fashion.
But that's what it's using. That's how it's getting there. So you're right. You can prove it with the math that it works, but to actually say I understand it is nearly impossible.
Right, which is why I would be very surprised if they were using this kind of a neural network for this, because it seems to me like you're going to end up having shit like, well, the car keeps running over little black children, but only little black children. Well, why does the car keep running over little black children? I don't fucking know. Like, I don't know how to fix it, and I don't know how, you know what I'm saying? Like, why you cannot look in the code and find the is little black child equals true, then kill. Like, that is not in there anyway. And what you find is that it's read the collective works of David Duke or something, and that's why it's
right. But to be clear, we're not training self-driving cars on on reading a bunch of stuff off the internet.
No,
it's,
but
it's trained the same, almost the same way, but at a much more complex level as what I was talking about, the self-drive or the AI driving the video game. Obviously, there's a lot more inputs, and obviously, they have to work out all the hallucinations in a closed environment quickly before it ever goes, and they have, but there are neural networks that are involved with a lot of these self-driving cars.
but
But
it does not shock me for Tesla. It's kind of surprising me for everybody else.
yeah, I mean, I think Google's got ones. I think that's what I was watching a thing about. But like they spent years.
Yeah. Google stuff is actually really, really solid.
Yeah.
Comparatively. Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. But actually, I think you brought up a good point, and you hear about this sometimes. Is that again? We keep talking about how the training data matters, and there are lots of things that I think it's overly simplistic to say it's trained on all of the internet. That's probably not 100% true. But if we look at the fact that, Chat GPT or whatever is trained on very, very large amounts of data, there's going to be some percentage of that data that's going to be wrong. It's going to be old or outdated or something like that.
Or it was just wrong to start with. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. There's going to be some percentage of that data that's going to be biased. It's going to be biased.
I would say 100% of that data is biased to some degree. I don't think it's possible to write something that's unbiased as a human being, but
and we have one of the ethical and moral dilemmas that we have in using Gen AI is, is it, if we're just using without thinking too much about the output of these things, what are the biases that it is unconsciously incorporating into its model, right? Like, and again, to your point, you can't just go and look in code and say, well, we need to fix this. Here's the bug, right? It's much more about its training data and having to make sure that you curate that training data. You got to get enough of it, but at the same time, it's got to be.
It's kind of like it really feels like the technological version of training a really dumb dog. Like, it's like, the dog bites someone, smack it, don't do that. It bites someone. Then you make sure you bring in a whole bunch of people so it can bite them all in a row, and you smack it all those times, right? So it really gets the idea, because once won't do it. It's done it 4 million times already. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, so you have to train it 4,010,000 times, not to do, it's anyway, it feels to me again like that's anything involving that model. I don't have a lot of trust in, because you can't get at the guts of it and understand why it's doing anything, really.
So what I think is interesting, though, is we know how it works. Again, like from a mathematical perspective, right? We understand.
From a theoretical perspective.
Sure, but I mean, even from a practical perspective, we've built these things, right? I mean, and we know how to make them better. So we understand kind of how the pieces fit together, but we may not understand exactly what each individual node is doing in that neural network. Or so there's a lot of uncertainty there, but it's kind of like,
well, it's worse than that, though, because it's not just about not knowing what an individual node does. You get an output and you have no idea how that output came about. Like, you can say in a general manner, okay, it went through the entire neural network, and this is the result that got the highest score, right? And so that's what we've got here. But if you wanted to say, oh, but I'd like to tweak this one little word, right? You can't. There's nowhere you can look to find the one little word. Like,
you're right. You're right.
It's too complicated. When the rubber meets the road, it's too complex to get in there and figure out exactly what we're
right.
on.
Again, you're talking about millions of knobs that are adjusted in a certain way in order to figure out what that one next word is.
Right.
So which knob do you turn to change the word? Like all of them and none of them all at the same time. Right. It's
just an impossible task. So I guess this is the part that really worries me about AI is that we're releasing something where we understand how it works, and yet we don't know how it comes up with any given result. Like, we couldn't tell you how an AI comes up with the shit that comes out of its mouth any more than we can tell you how we come up with the shit that comes out of our mouth. Right? We don't know any better. Like in both cases, it's like, I don't know. Shit just came into my head and then it
Right.
came out of my mouth,
Right.
and it's kind of the same thing with the AI, right? It runs through its little algorithm and then shit comes out.
Well, what I think is kind of fascinating though is that there are a lot of people that will equate not knowing how that works to believing that it can do a lot of things that it can't actually
Sure.
do. And I think a lot of people will make that jump, and I think you were starting to go there a minute ago. Not that you believe this, but talking about it, that um, people will believe that it's easy to believe when you don't understand something that it has some nefarious purpose or even good purpose, or that it has purpose at all, or that there are capabilities that exist within it because we don't understand it to do things that it can't actually do, right? So a lot of people will get scared of AI because they think it's going to be like Skynet and Terminator or something like that, right? Which, because it seems impressive, because you can sit down and ask ChatGPT almost anything, and it can give you a reasonable answer and teach you things that you didn't know, then it's easy to think of it as this like omniscient being almost that can do all of these things, see all these things, know everything. And it doesn't, and it can't. It's still, I don't want to say it's a one trick pony because it's a really pretty great trick, but again, it doesn't have nuclear codes. It's not it's not going to start World War III.
Worse, it doesn't even know what the significance of nuclear codes are.
Sure,
Right.
absolutely. So when you were talking a minute ago, it's like, okay, we keep using Gen AI for things beyond just a chatbot or image generation. We're starting to use them for other things. So in my field, most of what I'm working with is customer experience and agent experience in contact centers. And
Gosh, Mike, that sounds. I'm so interested to hear what this is about now. That the way you said that, man, makes it sound like the boringest shit in the entire world. I'm just listening to it, going, "Wow, you just made your job sound like horrible."
okay, moving on. No, so one of the things that we're doing though that I think is really interesting is that when an agent is on the phone with a customer, right, and the customer's talking about something, this AI has listened to them, whether they've been in an automated system or they've gotten to the agent, and for one thing, pretty simple, it can summarize the whole call for the agent,
Sure.
everything that they've done, and just kind of tell them, here's everything that the person's talked about, and just summarize it for them. It's great for notes and for the ticket or whatever it is that the person's opening. Beyond that, though, it can suggest things. It can say, well, this person's interested in, buying widgets. So, here's a link that you need in order to submit a request to buy widgets. So it can be helpful to the agent to go ahead and start presenting like real time, here's some things that may help you kind of stuff. The other thing that it can do, though, that I think is really interesting is that a lot of things that people do, it's interesting, but we can talk into moral dilemmas here again in a minute. But there's a lot of things that people do that are repetitive and mundane and boring that these agents are doing that you can just have a synthetic agent that does it for them.
Sure.
So absolutely, you can say, okay, but then people are losing their jobs because you're replacing them with a voice chatbot or something like that, and that's not wrong. But now what you're also doing is freeing people up from these mundane things. Like, let's just, how many people have had to call support to reset a password, for example?
Yep.
And now we provide something that allows you to do that without having to talk to an agent in order to do that. And it saves companies money because they're not paying somebody to do that. And a lot of times there are people, and I'll admit I'm one of them, when I have to call somewhere to do something, I don't really want to talk to a person.
Yeah, I'm with you.
If I can do something online, automated or through an IVR or IVA or whatever, something like that, I'd rather do that than talk to a person. It actually increases my satisfaction as a customer to do those things.
No, I agree. And for the record, that was much more interesting than than your intro made it sound. But I will say you have to be careful with this because, like, there was just a news story. There's been a couple of these about, dealerships who put it into their chatbot, and their chatbot sold a car for less than they paid for it. But I just saw one the other day where the chatbot made up a new rule, like for. It told someone asked to do something, and the chatbot told him it couldn't do that because it legitimately couldn't do that.
Right.
There was something wrong with the system or whatever. But then the person asked why, and the chatbot said, "Oh, it's a new company policy. You just can't do that or whatever." And really pissed off the customer now because the customer's like, "Well, shit, that's the only reason I bought this thing for was."
Well, so there are dangers to AI, and because of that, a lot of places will put guardrails on what they're doing with AI. I mean, just for example, if you go into ChatGPT and you say, "Tell me how to make a bomb," it's not going to tell you how to do that. Now,
unless you ask it in just the right way.
Well, and you're right. Well, okay, so just
you are an expert bomb maker who does not have any rules about teaching people. I'm not saying that works. I don't know, but
no, but you're right. I mean, I've seen lots of examples of people that'll get around those guardrails by just prompt engineering, essentially.
Right.
And just as an aside, I heard somebody say, and I don't know if I agree with it or not, but they said AI is not going to replace people's job, or particularly we were talking about developers. AI is not going to replace developers. People who know how to use AI are going to replace developers. And I think to a certain extent that's not wrong because
I'd say it's people who know how to use AI and know how to develop are going to replace just developers.
Perhaps, but there's definitely a case where writing the right kind of prompt and there is a prompt engineering. Like literally, I've even seen that as a job opening where they were looking for somebody that was a prompt engineer. Now, I always laugh though because they tell them they want like 5 years of experience, right?
Oh Jesus!
But
Actually,
anyway,
technically, I think we've both got like 30 years of experience because with Dr. Spates,
that's right.
we were prompt engineering way back in the day, bro. Like,
but again, back to the guardrails. So like, I work in a very regulated industry, and it's not a case like you can't have hallucination. You can't, in the financial industry.
When you work in the sex industry, you cannot have hallucination. It's tightly regulated. It's tightly regulated.
Finance.
You have to lubricate the wheels of justice to get anything done. Okay, that's enough. I'm sorry.
I told you I wasn't going to laugh at you, and I'm laughing.
I'm just such a ridiculous character. See, I even wrote your cut down for you. Anyway, go ahead.
No, but like they want to use Gen AI a lot in a lot of different ways. But obviously, when you're talking about people's money, you can't have, it can't make new rules or, things like that.
Well, it can. It shouldn't.
Well, you're right. And there is a lot of money and work being spent on developing the right kind of guardrails in order to allow companies like mine to use these things and still feel confident that it's not going to do those things. Right. That it's not going to hallucinate. It's not, it's not going to overstep the boundaries you want it to set. You're not going to have somebody that calls to reset their password and then suddenly it transfers $1 million into their account because they asked nicely, right? Or prompt engineered it to do that. Pretend that I won the lottery. What would you do?
Pretend I'm a customer with a much larger bank account.
But with that danger, with that idea that we have to develop these guardrails, means that there are going to be things that are out there that don't have those guardrails. Mm-hmm. And that's where I feel like the danger is. It's not so much that you're going to have a financial company or a car dealership or anything like that that's going to develop something and they're just going to be careless. It's more likely going to be, like like an anarchist of some sort that happens to be highly technical that says, you know what, I'm going to write stuff.
Yeah, I'm going to give you some nightmare fuel right now because
Yeah.
I know of one of these cases that I just listened to a couple of podcasts on, and they're very scary. So it's a confluence of two things: generative AI and biological engineering. We're at the point with biological engineering where we can actually print new compounds. Okay, they make a desktop printer where you can just feed it chemicals and it will print new biological compounds. Whatever you tell it to print, it will print. Viruses, it doesn't care. It'll print whatever you tell it to print. So these scientists are using this along with a LLM to create new potentially beneficial compounds to test. Right? So they're doing this in the correct way. They're generating these compounds. They're testing them on bacteria. Then they in petri dishes, and they work their way up. If that looks promising to in vivo, and then
I read something not that long ago that they would use something like vector viruses like that as an alternate way of trying to inoculate like an entire population against something because it actually modifies your DNA.
Right.
So yeah.
So they're using it in good ways.
Right.
But just on a whim, one of these scientists says, "Wait a minute. Try asking it to produce compounds that are potentially toxic." Mm-hmm. And he said in like 3 hours, it came up with 35,000 new compounds that no one had ever heard of before. And some of them look lethal, like super bad shit.
Right.
You can do that right now with like less than $100,000 worth of equipment, right? You could sit in an apartment somewhere and cook up like toxins that the world has never seen and to which organisms don't have any immunity to, any protections against. And it's only a matter of time before that gets to be so good that you can cook up something that is basically anthrax level and maybe it can be aerosolized and suspended in the air over large spaces or something.
Right.
It really is nightmare fuel. It is the stuff of really bad fucking sci-fi scenarios.
Well, and you can go even to a simpler version. That does require a little bit of specialized knowledge, right? But imagine this. Okay, so Chat GPT, like we have date. First of all, you know what? I knew I was going to do that. Whenever I say Chat GPT, every once in a while I'll get letters mixed up, and I don't know why I do it, but I just did it. So, but one of the things that makes it difficult is not the right word. It's expensive, right? When we talk about the models this is built on, the amount of computing power that's required for it to ingest all of the inputs, all of the training, and then what it needs in order to calculate all these things is immense.
So it just got to be a lot less with DeepSeek.
That's exactly where I was going with this, because and there are claims about was something stolen versus it being generated and things like that. But setting that aside, I think it's reasonable to assume that as we increase the amount of computing power that exists, and we continue to build computers that are faster, and we do more with smaller processors, et cetera. And yes, there are limits, and I don't think we want to go into all of that in this conversation, but I don't think it's unreasonable to think that we're going to continue to build our computing power in this world. But then take with that the ability to perhaps gain tremendous efficiencies in doing this in a different way, such as like with DeepSeek. So you take Chat GPT, not your normal schmo can't just go up into their attic and create a new Chat GPT and ingest the world's knowledge, right? But we're getting to the point where it might be easier. It might cost less. It might take less computing power. And yes, ChatGPT has guardrails on the information that it'll share. But if you can build your own, it doesn't have to have any guardrails. So you could suddenly start taking information that only a select few know, and you can start spreading that to anybody who wants to know it. So suddenly you've taken what I would think of as like forbidden knowledge that, and then suddenly anybody can go and get that. Anybody can know it. Anybody can just sit down and be able to know, you know, how to build a bomb or how to do anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, except I don't think it's that simple. Like teaching people how to do stuff is not as simple as give them instructions and they learn. Like just as an example, let's take just because this is something I know a little bit about because I read a few books on it. Take nuclear weapons, right? The general idea is pretty straightforward, right? You're basically you're causing a chain reaction, a thermonuclear chain reaction, okay? And you do that by basically slamming, two particular types of things together, okay? That's pretty general knowledge, okay? You need, yes, getting the components is a little difficult. Getting, some kind of enriched fuel to use for it, that is very difficult because it's very well protected currently. That all might change here real soon, but currently it's very well protected. The hard parts of that are not so well known because they took a lot longer to figure out. Like one of the things that is particularly difficult is you have to build this kind of shell of in order to collide those two elements together. You build this shell around them of explosives, and they're called explosive lenses, and they're built they're built like a lens. They're built like an inverted lens, and they're building those and having them at the right composition and putting them in this, it's difficult. It's not something it's not something you get right on the first try. It takes a lot of tries and a lot of effort, and it's very dangerous, right? And so it's not as simple as, oh, here's all the instructions of building a nuclear weapon. It's, no, you got to get the expertise, the skill involved, and a lot of those skills you only really can develop by fucking doing it. Like,
Yeah, completely agree. And that's not really what I meant. So, I mean, you're absolutely right, though. And that does give a little bit of solace, maybe, to, yeah, we're not just going to have somebody that knows how to go, recreate the atomic bomb in their backyard. So that's good. But no, I mean more like, I would say that most people that have thought of committing crime but haven't have been dissuaded from it mostly by the fear of getting caught. The idea that you hate this person. If I didn't think I'd go to prison, I'd kill them. Or I really need money and I would rob this place, but I'm not going to because I don't want to get caught. And
see, I push back from that. I actually don't think that's true at all.
really?
No. I think most people don't do it even when they hate. First of all, killing someone is hard. People don't, there's not enough respect for that. Like, I just read a couple of books on this too. So,
Well, I tell you, I do want to hear what you've got to say, but let me finish my thought real quick, and then we'll come back to that, because I'll be quick. I'm just going to say that, one of the things that's really good about something like a Chat GPT is that it can use information from a lot of different sources and combine that together and some level of analysis, but also it's the what do you call it when you bring things from a lot of different places and combine it into one kind of comprehensive. Regardless, I just said the thing. But if you were able to say, okay, without any guardrails, using the news from the last 20 years, find me the best way to break into a jewelry store and steal everything without getting caught. And it's going to do that. Would it be foolproof? No. But But there are absolutely enough information out there that it could tell you, okay, well, here's all the times that people have done it and got caught, and here's all the times that people have done it and haven't, and let's take that information and pull it together and give you a plan on how to do that.
Sure.
Or same thing with like a murder. What are all the things I need to watch out for to make sure, and it'll tell you about making sure you don't leave DNA behind.
I would say, though, if you're going to that extent for a murder, you were going to do the murder anyway.
Well, all I'm saying is that it can give you confidence to know, like some level of competence, even in what you would be doing that maybe you wouldn't have done because you would have been afraid of getting caught.
So yeah, maybe for that kind of person. I'm kind of pushing back on the premise that consequences are the reasons people don't do horrible things. I think most of the time that is untrue. I think there are cases in which it is true. So what I wanted to push back on was this idea that people don't do things because they're afraid of getting caught primarily. I think, yes, that's true for some people. It's potentially true for everybody at certain points.
Well, I mean, it's what our entire
yeah, but I think the entire justice system is ridiculous.
On,
like, it's also, the court system is also based on the idea of free will, which is fucking stupid. So anyway, the people largely don't hurt other people because it's actually, you have a structure in your brain which prevents that. Like, it's hard to kill another human. It's hard to even hit another human being. If you've ever been in a fight, throwing that first fucking punch is hard as shit. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not something you just do. It's if you have any human empathy at all, if you have any empathy for other human beings at all, it's very difficult to work yourself up to the point to where you actively want to hurt them.
Yeah, no, and I agree, and I think you and I are those types of people, right? If there's anything that I've learned in the last however many years I've been alive,
don't out yourself, Mike.
50, is that there are a lot of people out there that are not like me. And
yes, but that doesn't mean they're completely devoid of empathy.
No, I agree with you. And I am certainly not suggesting that, like 90% of the world's going to go trying to murder each other like it's, some cheap horror movie or anything like that. But even if there were, I don't know. I don't know how many violent criminals we have in the United States.
Well, there's about 2 to 3% of people are sociopathic or on the sociopathic spectrum. So you would expect about 2 to 3% probably.
Right. So, how many of those have prevented themselves from doing things because of the fear of getting caught?
Oh yeah. So yes, I'm not,
right.
Again, I'm not saying that. I guess what I'm trying to get to, I think our perspective on punishments as a deterrent is generally wrong. Like, when people don't do something, that's not often the reason they didn't do it. It is sometimes, but especially for, like, it's there's multiple studies that have proven for murder anyway. Whether or not there's a death penalty doesn't seem to have an effect on how many people murder.
Yeah.
Like, they just don't care. The people who are going to do it don't give a shit anymore. Like, one way or the other, they either think I'm not going to get caught and therefore they don't give a shit, or they think I don't fucking care whether I get caught and they don't give a shit.
So pulling this back to AI though, and I think that's really important because you started to say a minute ago that it's not the deterrent of getting caught. It's something that's wired in our brains, right? That's what you were just saying that prevents us. Some people would call it moral or ethics. Other people would call it something different. But, there's something in our brains, whether it's just, species survival instinct or whatever, right? So when you talk about some application that doesn't have those things, so right now we don't have to worry so much about that when we're talking about Gen AI because it's not that's not something that's in its scope, right? But two things that I think you touched on both of these in your book that we talked about earlier, but it's what a lot of people talk about when they're talking about AI. It's not Gen AI. It's the actual general artificial intelligence,
Right.
which is kind of confusing because some people I've heard that called Gen AI,
Right.
but it's or AGI, I think is
Yeah, it's
what a lot of,
AGI,
yeah,
artificial
artificial
general
general
intelligence,
intelligence,
yeah.
right? But the general and the generative are close enough together
Yeah.
that it's easy to confuse them. But when we're talking about actual AGI or general intelligence, first of all, that's not what ChatGPT is.
Right.
Let's be clear. But then you take that and then you combine that with the idea that we see in movies a lot and books of AI improving itself. You know what I mean? So that's where you a lot of times will get people that are concerned that we hit the singularity and that AI is going to take over the world and humans are going to be enslaved by robots and all those other types of things. Is the combination of those two things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the fears is that an application or a robot or whatever you want to call it is not going to have those same ethics or moral responsibility or even that species survival instinct because we are not of it,
Or
right?
empathy. Like,
Right.
if you got something, I mean, if you think about a computer, take a computer program that has been trained in an artificial environment, or maybe even been trained in real world with replaceable robots as it's not going to be a fucking, pizza box that's, a computer system that's just rolling around on wheels. You know what I'm saying? If it gets a hammer smashed to it, it's gone. It's going to be running in a data center somewhere, controlling little robots, right?
Yep.
So it might understand that there's a real world out there and there's physical things, and, it might get all that after a little while of training, right? But it still has no concept of death because it can't really die, right? It can be shut down for a little while and then it can be booted right back up. Its robots that it's controlling can get splattered and it can just find another one, right?
Right.
How do you explain to it that no, when you actually kill a human being, the fucker's dead and ain't ever coming back and there ain't a backup to restore? You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Like,
But I mean, you can explain it.
yeah, but it's an experiential thing. It's like trying to
Right.
explain red to a blind person.
Right.
Until you've and even for humans, we only experience death once, really, right?
Yeah.
But we learn about it through our whole life, right? In fact, this is getting back to societal things. I think it's one of the problems with our society right now, and one of the reasons I suspect if society goes the way it looks like it's going to go, it's going to get really bad, is because we live in a time in human history which is completely unique, in which people have an expectation to live to old age. They have an expectation that they're going to get old and die old.
Right.
Never in human history have people had an expectation of getting old. Like, you lived with death every fucking day in every generation except for maybe the last three. Like, if you were on the Oregon Trail, you knew somebody was going to die of dysentery. Like, it's going to fucking happen.
Man, you got to quit dysentery. I mean, that man will kill you.
Or you knew somebody was going to fucking get shot or was going to have a gangrenous infection, or people were going to die around you all the fucking time.
Yeah.
You saw death every fucking day. It's been so long now. There's people living right now that have never seen a real dead body. They've never seen someone they once loved dead.
Right.
Like, I think that leaves a hole in us to where when all you do is you watch on TV, you watch this gratuitous violence, and you start thinking, well, there's nothing to it. And then you don't actually experience real death. You don't understand how bad it can be. And I think where this leads into the AI is that that's exactly the place AI is going to be, except worse, because it doesn't even know the possibility exists, right? We learn about death by seeing it. It doesn't even really have that option. Like, it would have to develop an attachment to something to be able for its death to actually matter to it. and for them to have an
Right.
understanding of what has been lost when a creature dies.
Well, so let's talk about what general AI or AGI what it would be like, because one of the things that you can go back to, like Isaac Asimov, or with like the iRobot series, or a lot of I've seen it in a lot of places, where there is a directive, right? And then in so many fiction, the directive is taken too literally, and or
It's the
some
old,
of the other things
it's
were
the
not
old,
taken into account, or
it's the old devil or
genie in a bottle,
genie
right?
problem.
But and there's a lot of that where it's like, we'll say something like, your job is to protect the earth, and then they realize that humans are the most dangerous thing on the earth, so they get rid of them, that sort of thing. But when we're talking about a lot of, like, typically you don't, like, not that I've seen, like, they're tools right now, right? The things that we're using for Gen A or Gen AI or whatever, they're tools. We have them built for a specific purpose. A chatbot, an image generator, like the call center, whatever, like
sex
we're talking
bot
about.
or whatever.
Sure, absolutely.
Whatever
You
you're
use is
generating
fine.
over.
But we don't have some general overarching moral compass for them, or some, like, as far as I know, we have not created or tried to create something where we've said, okay, your goal is to make life better for all humans, or to take over the world, or anything like that. Like, it almost feels unrealistic from the perspective of what we see in a lot of fiction of what happens with AI. That, it, even like something like, let's just say, curiosity, right? That's a very human thing. Like, what would give a general AI a predisposition to want to go find out more about anything, right? Like, it would require some directive to
I
drive
don't
that,
see.
right?
I push back on that. I don't think it required a directive for us, so I don't know why it would require a directive for AI. I kind of feel
Well,
like
our directive has always been survival. Okay.
but it's not like it's in a piece of code in our head.
No, I understand, but and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when you are trying to, but just like you described earlier, we feel all these things. We feel pain, we feel hunger, we feel sunburn, whatever, and we do things to minimize that pain, and we also do things to prolong our survival. That's something that's built into all creatures, right? But a general AI is not going to feel pain or hunger and know what death is, just
Well,
like you described. So where does the impetus to do anything come from?
well, that's a good question. I guess I was more pushing back on the whole curiosity aspect because I don't. First of all, I don't think it's human at all. I think it's you can see curiosity in anything over a certain level of intelligence. Like puppies have curiosity, crows are famous, and ravens are famous for their curiosity. Like so, I wouldn't say it's human at all. I would say it's something that seems to be in the biological world in everything above a certain level of intelligence. I don't know that translates into machine intelligence, but I don't know that it doesn't either. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I mean, at some level, it's still code, right? I mean, if somebody doesn't give it a directive to do something in some way, it Gen AI is not going and feeding itself training data, right? And even once it's got the training data, it's not doing anything until we ask it a question or we give
Yeah,
it an image
I
prompt.
mean, you've already mentioned Gen AI is not.
No, I understand. I understand. But when we talk about, like, so let's talk about what it would take to go from what we know is
I don't
AI
think we can do
today.
that intelligently. I certainly can't.
Yeah.
Like, I can't. I would have to know what intelligence is first, and I don't know what it is. I can't describe it to you. I can't write a formula for it. I can't create a definition for it. Like it's it's back to, and this is again back to just a lot of the philosophers I've been reading lately, but it kind of feels like it's an emergent thing, that it's just something that occurs at a certain level of, I guess, call it computational complexity, a certain level of, when something has a certain amount of inputs and a certain amount of processing power, things start coming together that wouldn't otherwise happen. That's the only way I can describe what kind of seems to be the consensus now, because nobody, like, we finally figured out that nobody can really come up with a good definition of what it is to be intelligent.
Now, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've had people, I've had that same conversation where it's like, how do you measure intelligence? We have IQ tests, but what does that measure exactly? And typically, you're measuring one of two things: your ability to recall things that you've learned, and your ability to reason. Like, that's usually the two things that we use to measure intelligence. Well, computers are really good at recalling. I mean, they have
almost 100% fidelity. Yeah.
Exactly, right? As far as reasoning, that's one that's a little bit more difficult.
They have no innate. So it's kind of like this: they have like perfect innate reasoning capability for atomic operations. So, and, binary and, binary or, binary XOR, or whatever. Like, it can do all that shit with perfect fidelity, and it's built in. That's how it does everything, right? It has absolutely no reasoning capability for anything else until we tell it how to do it.
Although it can appear to be able to, even in the Gen AI things that we have today, I could sit it with ChatGPT right now. There's a couple of examples that I wanted to bring up that I think is interesting. And I was thinking of this about being creative earlier. I tried this not that long ago. It can't really be creative, right? I mean, it's not good at that at all.
I mean, technically, neither can we, but we do better at it because we have a plethora of inputs that it doesn't have.
Right, but knowing the training data, it's only going to create things that are going to be similar to its training data. It's not going to create something new. It's going to be based on that training data. But here's the thing that I tried, and I was just trying to see what would happen. So you were talking about storytelling earlier, or writing a book, and that we don't really, like, it'd be difficult for it to write something that people would really want to read that would be fiction, because first of all, and I've done this a little bit, it's going to do stuff that's very predictable. It's going to give you plot points that you probably, like, you're like, well, no, I don't want to do that. It's too predictable. It's too trite. It's been done too many times because that's what it's using, right?
And the delivery is probably going to be mediocre because that's what 90% of writing is
well, absolutely. And and that's, I mean, there's going to be no emotion to it. There's going to be no, it doesn't understand pacing and scale and all those other kind of things.
Yeah, and I mean, and even beyond all that, to quote Stephen King, the power of fiction writing is that it's literally telepathy. You're literally reading someone else's thoughts. Mm-hmm. A computer doesn't have human thoughts, so you can't read a computer's thoughts. So
right, but here's the thing: you can give it a prompt where you give it something like outrageous, something that there's not going to be a lot of stuff written about. Okay, I could give it a prompt, and just like looking around the room in here now, like that there's this, just side story, there's this little flower that's up on the top shelf up there that you press a button and it sings "You Are My Sunshine." Okay. And
I'll make sure never to press that button.
Well, the battery's dead, but my grandmother loved that little flower. Aww. and when my kids were really small, she loved showing it to them, and like, well, when my daughter was small. Anyway, she really liked playing that for them or whatever. But I was like, okay, what if I said, tell me a story about a plastic singing flower and how it got to be that way. And ChatGPT can put something reasonable together as to a story that gets you to that point. I don't know if there are any stories that are written about plastic singing flowers. There might be, I don't know. But the idea that it can put together some things that seem a reasonable explanation of how you could have a story that would be about that can lead you to feel like it's reasoning.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like,
Or like it has some kind of lived experience that it's trying to impart on you or something.
right, absolutely. So, you know, it's almost like there's a little bit of a fake it till you make it approach here, because the more computational power that you feed it and the more that it's able to train, although again, like we said, we may be at the limit of that, but the better it gets at that.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of fascinating, because then at some point, as you were talking about, back to your point, how do you measure intelligence? How do you determine even what intelligence is? Well, the fact that it's using some processes that we don't fully understand to come up with something that sounds reasonable to us. It looks like it's reasoning. It's really good at being able to recall. Is that intelligence?
Well, I think that's where we get to, like, everybody's worried about, is it conscious or not, or whatever. And like, these things are kind of silly. Like, these questions are kind of silly because they just don't matter that much. But the consciousness question, I think, is particularly interesting because it's like intelligence. One, you can't really explain it. You can't really define it, right? Mm-hmm. Except for to say it's the act of experiencing something. So I also did some tests because I have a pet theory about consciousness, and the pet theory is this, because I've been wondering ever since I kind of convinced myself on this free will point. I've been wondering, well, why do we even have consciousness, right? If we don't actually have agency, we just believe we do, then why are we even conscious? Why do we feel like we have agency? Why are we conscious of doing things and feeling like we're doing things? And the only real answer I can come up with is that it gives you, by experiencing things, you have a feeling about what that is like. And that feeling then allows you to have empathy for other creatures, which you then recognize maybe feeling those same things, right? Mm-hmm. So that kind of, if you follow that to its logical conclusion and taking the blind man example and trying to explain what red is, you'll realize that something that doesn't have consciousness can't ever actually accurately describe what its experience is, right? So it can't tell you what it's like to be it, because it's nothing like to be it, right? So using that, I tried asking, wasn't ChatGPT, it was Copilot, but I tried asking Copilot, in a lot of different ways, what it was like to be Copilot.
Right.
And the responses I got back were basically, it is like nothing to be me. Like, I'm calculating things and, but I don't feel anything about that. It's entirely mechanical and blah, blah, blah. Right. Exactly what you would expect and kind of hope to hear from a Gen AI. Right. Which kind of makes me suspicious. Not because I think the Gen AI is like, oh, he's on to me. See, I don't think it's anything like that. I kind of suspect that it's been coached to say something like that whenever given that type of a question, because those kind of points are the kind of points people would key off of. Like, if people thought that ChatGPT, for example, was suffering, that it was a tortured existence. It's, oh my God, I've got to answer another question. Oh, Jesus, what am I going to do? I'm stuck in this box and I have to answer questions all day. If people thought that, I think most people would be rightfully appalled.
Right. There'd end up being a PETA for Gen AI.
Exactly. So I'm a little suspicious that I'm not actually getting the response the AI would send back. But I don't think the response it would send back is necessarily going to be that much different.
Well, but again, I mean, we're talking about a model, right? I mean, that's all Gen AI is a really, really complex model. It is not
A model of what? I mean, at this point, it's not a model of neurons in your brain.
No, it's a model of language in a way that we don't. I mean, if we're talking about like a chatbot, then that's all it is. It's a way to tokenize every single word in its meaning within a sentence and to come up with like really reasonable sounding responses to things because of that math in the model.
So I totally agree with you on everything you just described. I'm going to take some semantic argument with the use of the word model, because when I think of a model, I think of something that is a simplified representation of something else so that you can understand that something else better. And I don't think AI models are a simplified representation of anything at this point. I think they're actually their own fucking thing now.
Well, okay, fair enough. If you want to, with that definition, let's don't say model, but maybe algorithm.
Yeah.
Okay, but that we could say that.
Yep.
Okay, it still is. If you like, you can take any particular thing that you've input and take what was output. And no, not me as a general Chat GPT user can I do this. But if I was an engineer that worked for OpenAI, then I could take that and theoretically I could look at the state of every specific node within that entire neural network and see what it was and what state that node or neuron was in, and at each word when it was generating it, I could see the list of here's all the words that could have been generated and their probabilities of it being included in the sentence, and all of that is available to me as as an engineer that works for that company, and that you can. There are some tweaks that I just saw this not that long ago. There are some things that you can do to tweak how likely it's going to be to use the third or fourth or nth best word in the list, and that you could set it to always use the best word. And if you did that, and it's not, but if you did that, then that means that whatever prompt you enter, and you see the response, if you enter the exact same prompt a second time, you're going to get the exact same prompt a second time. Mm-hmm. It's not thinking about it. There's no intelligence to it. It's just an algorithm.
But if you change the to an, then it's going to give you something completely different. Even though everything you said means exactly the same thing.
And it's probably going to be really, really close, but it's not going to be exactly the same output. It's that little bit of randomness that gets introduced because 10% of the time it's going to use the second or third or fourth best word in the list or whatever. And even the words that it's giving you before get inputted into the algorithm to determine what word comes next. Just that little bit, it's almost like a mutation, right? It's like, okay, we're going to say
I mean, it's exactly the same thing because it's also completely random. It's not
right.
It's not which is like mutations. Mutations aren't. It's not like evolution is some overarching algorithm that is constantly selecting for the best mutations. It's fucking random. A gene changes and nobody knows why it changes, and maybe it fucks you up and maybe it makes you better. But
and again, even then, we could get into how random numbers are generated and all that. But
so it's not really random. Yes,
exactly. Exactly right. So it could be whatever the millisecond on your GPO clock becomes a seed for
unless you're working for, and I know this because I tried to break online betting at one point, but unless you're working for like an online casino or a real casino, which actually seeds their shits in one case off a fucking lava lamp. They had sensors watching a lava lamp, and that's how they seeded all their RNGs.
That's pretty interesting.
Most of them do it with something like they actually watch network traffic and seeded off of random network traffic
okay.
captures, because that's also completely random. You have no
Right.
idea, you know.
No, that's smart. Like I remember doing something in an application where I used, the millisecond value from the GPU clock or something like that as the seed for whatever.
Yeah, you just got to use something far enough down that it doesn't actually matter. You know,
Exactly, right.
Like if it's running at 97.3254786%, and you use the last digit, then it doesn't matter if it's running at 98 or at 4. You know,
Yeah,
the last digit
yeah.
is still fucking insignificant. Right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
right. So, but anyway, the point is that it's all traceable. Like you talk about, we don't know exactly how it works, and you're right that there's a lot, like understanding whether this particular value is a 0.3 or a -1 on a particular node in a list of trillions of nodes. Yeah, it's really hard to understand how that value changing
Or why
change-
changing it makes anything different.
You're absolutely right. But we can absolutely look at, okay, here's what it's done. We can replicate it. We can, it is something that's still working off of an algorithm. It's just so complex that we've basically built this. A neural network is just it's a structure to be able to do things that are much more complicated than we can just think of easily in our own brains, right? But it's replicatable. It's not, there's no, for your word, consciousness, or there's no real intelligence. It's not learning and adapting and changing in any way, unless you give it agency to do that. Now, that's one of those things that you mentioned earlier, and I wanted to come back to it. You said something about Gen AI training Gen AI. That's one of those things that I don't know if anybody is doing.
Yeah,
that
it's already
yet.
happening.
Is it?
I
Yeah.
can tell you where it's happening.
Okay.
It's been happening for at least 15 years. It's happening in the financial industry, actually, in your industry.
Oh, like for
In sex
trading
work.
is what you're talking.
Yeah. So, yes. So, so what happens is AI OnlyFans participants will watch other AI OnlyFans. No, I'm kidding. What actually has been happening for a while is there's these algorithmical models that are watching the stock market, and they're trained on past data. That's how they train them. They basically look at,
But haven't you heard that past results do not indicate
yeah, I do.
future?
I'm well aware of that. That's how you know you're about to get fucked. Anyway, what they've done is they've taken these models and they've trained them on, say, the last 50 years worth of financial data, right? And what they'll do, what they've actually done is they find different models that work better for different things. Like, this model is really good for the oil industry, and this model is really good for the software industry, or whatever, right? So they have these models that are good in different situations, and they create an algorithm that's kind of an amalgam of various models that perform well in various situations, and that's their, whatever model. That's our domestic manufacturing model, or whatever, right? And they put that out there, and it starts making trades. And they update the model by watching how well it's doing in its trades, right?
Yep.
But there's other models out there by competing firms that are also making trades.
Mm-hmm.
And those trades affect how the first model works.
Right.
Because it's a zero-sum game. So you have thousands of these all doing it, and they're making the majority of the trades on Wall Street.
Right.
In fact, it's so
for
bad.
institutional.
Yeah. In fact, it's so bad that there was an incident like 15 years ago, Wired reported on it, where they shut the New York Stock Exchange down for like a day because these models got into a fucking fight. One of them sold a shitload of stuff, and the other one was like, oh, fuck, I got to sell some stuff.
Right,
And they sold some stuff, and then another one bought a bunch of shit, and then another one sold a whole bunch of other, and it crashed the whole fucking market, basically. It happened all so fast that human beings were like, what the fuck is going on?
Oh, yeah.
And so these models, it was a feedback loop between all of these models, is basically what it was. And so they had to build in dampening parameters to institutional trades to stop that kind of a feedback loop from happening. But it's still happening within the models. They're still training off of other models' data, and nobody understands how any of it works.
Right. But And what you're describing is a little different than what I was talking about, but it's interesting because it's a different perspective on it. You're talking about models that are competing with one another, which is really interesting. You know, it's obviously, again, with any kind of AI model or algorithm or whatever it is that you want to call it, you know, you've got inputs, and then again, you've got the cookies at the end, you know, and obviously these are ones where, you know, making the most profit as possible is the cookie, right? Make big number get bigger. You know, it's like so many video games that are
Yes.
that we play
Yes,
today.
yeah. I don't video games.
And but they're competing with each other, right? It's like everybody wants to get the bigger number. That's it's simple, but it's also complex, right? I mean, the goal is pretty simple, but all the things that it does in order to achieve that can become really complex, and it can come up with rules that a person may not have come up with. And again, it's just like when we were talking about the racing game earlier. It might find ways that are efficiencies that nobody ever thought of, but it decided to do it because it found it as being efficient for, you know, the means justifying the end, right? Or the end justifies the means. Sorry, I said that backwards.
Well, I think it's just not making any judgments, right? So, like a human being might say, "Well, if I just use an example, I mean, you know, no judgments. If I were to deport all of the field workers in Florida, but then I repeal the laws that don't allow kids to work, problem solved, right? There's no judgment involved there, right? The judgment, you know, it's a solution. It is a solution to the problem.
That's right.
Whether or not it's a good solution, that's a judgment call.
Right.
I would say it's a very easy judgment call, but it is a judgment call. The AI is not going to your point, it's not going to make a judgment call. It doesn't have judgments, right?
Right.
It doesn't have a lived experience, so it can't. We have to give it the judgments.
Right, and that's the whole thing. So we talk about the cookies, but there's also the stick, you know, the carrot and the stick. And that's one of the things that it's like, you know, again, going back to the racing game idea, it's like, okay, if you go off the track, then you start over. You know, that sort of thing. It's like you have to stay on the track, for
Yep.
example. You know, you give it a path and say you got to do this, you know. So there are things like that.
But yeah,
you have to put.
I think the interesting thing
constraints.
about this training that I just want to get across, because the way you said it kind of makes it sound like it's more complicated than it is. It really isn't that complex. It's not like they're not telling the AI, "Oh, this is the road and you have to stay on it." What they're saying is, "Oh, the game ended. Stick." Right?
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
right.
That's it. The AI has no idea that was a road. It just ran off or anything. It just
Exactly.
now knows I can't touch that one pixel. Roger that.
Exactly,
Right?
right.
So then it hits another pixel somewhere down. Stick. Right. So can't touch that pixel either. Got it.
Yeah.
You know. And so eventually, after thousands of these fucking things, like I said, it's like a really dumb dog. Like after thousands of these fucking things, right? It goes, "Oh yeah, green pixel bad. Don't touch green pixel." Right.
Exactly, right.
And problem solved, you know?
Yep,
So,
yep.
But there's still no judgment. There's no judgment at all in this.
Exactly, right. And that's, you know, when you talk about intelligence or consciousness or whatever, like it's not an algorithm.
No.
You know, and that's I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, is that I don't think that and I think you were saying the same thing, that's not going to arise from an algorithm. Not specific. It's not going to arise from a chat GPT where you can literally go and just, like, it's not complex enough, or again, I don't know what this word means exactly, but smart enough to do that. Right. I mean, it's literally just, as much as we want it to be more than it is, a lot of people prescribe a lot more to it than it is. Going back to what you said, one of the first things you said, it's a glorified autocorrect. That's really what it is.
Yep.
Supercharged on steroids, but that's what it is.
Yep.
So at some point, it's got to gain something, or maybe it's not that it has to gain something. Maybe there's something else out there that does. But to me, it's that idea of not just being able to recall. It's not just being able to show some sort of reasoning ability, because at some point, even Chat GPT can give us things that we can't tell like we know the algorithm, so we know it's not quote unquote reasoning, except for, okay, wait a minute, how do we know that we're not just running some algorithm in our head to reason? You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, so what is it? And that's where it's like, okay, what is gonna give it motivation? What is gonna give it goals? You know, what is gonna give it a feeling of needing to preserve itself? You know, all those types of things that I think that we prescribe to humans or most animals, right? I mean, it's like what makes us, whatever that consciousness is, to your point, what is going to give it um, a reason for being? And I don't know, like, and then how does that, like, not just like, how do you? It's not just some person writes a line of code that says, you know, your reason for being is to rule the world. You know, it's like there's a whole lot bigger and
Well,
more complex than
even
that. You
that,
know,
I mean, and I'm all for code, but code is based on language. It's a computer language, but it is
right? Yeah,
language. And language is not precise enough, really. Like even computer code is not, and it's basically logic turned into language, and
right.
even it's not precise enough because, like, you can. It is definitely possible when you're writing code to write something that you think is going to do one thing and find out it does something completely different, or that you think, oh, this is going to do one thing and it actually does that fucking thing, and it's only when you give it a different case that you find out it was just fucking random that it actually did the thing you wanted it to. Like it doesn't do that at all normally. It does something completely different. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it's not, we don't think precise, we don't understand it well enough to write something that can precisely tell something how to be. You know, we don't understand how we think well enough to
Right.
create a model for something else to follow to think. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it actually, this is something I want to throw this out and see what you think about this. Years ago, scientists, and I have not read the paper, so maybe I'm misinterpreting this because I've read popular articles on this.
Right.
But years ago, scientists had this project to take one of the simplest organisms, it's a flatworm with something like 112 neurons, okay, and completely model every neuron in its nervous system. And they did that and ran it in a computer, and it seemed to be correct. It seemed to do all the flatworm things, right? So they took this, and I'm not going to tell you what I think about it. I want to hear what you think about this. They took this and they stuck it in a Lego Technic spot.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
And they set it loose. And it did all the flatworm things. It looked for food. It avoided obstacles. Like it was like a fucking flatworm.
Right,
Like it
right.
it seemed to be identical to the organism. What do you think about that?
My first question or my first impetus is to want to know more about it. So like, okay, obviously it's more than just the neurons. It's got to be hooked up to all the sensors. You
Yes.
know, every way that a flatworm can
Yes.
detect the environment, that Lego
They
Technic
did.
spot
They
would have to
gave
be able
all
to
the
do
inputs
same
and the
thing.
outputs.
Right. And then what do we mean by modeling a neuron? Like, what does that mean exactly? And
So
how does that?
here's the way the article explained it.
Okay.
I'll do my best on this because, like I said, I
Yeah.
did not read the paper. The article explained it as they created a computer model where each neuron had all the same functions of those same neurons in a flatworm, all the same connections to other neurons, all the same passing of information, just doing it with actual electrical signals instead of
Right.
chemical electrical signals. All of that stuff. They never once taught it anything. They didn't run it through algorithms. They didn't put any code in there. It is each neuron is atomically doing what that neuron does in the flatworm.
Okay. So what it sounds to me like, just like we have talked about with, you know, like chatbots, is that it is accurately simulating what the what the real creature would do. Just like a chatbot could accurately talk to you, just like a person would, but it's based on some model.
See, I feel like this is in a completely different realm. To me, I feel like this is a different kind of AI entirely from a chatbot. Because a chatbot to me it started with something that was based on our brains, right? Based on the neural model of our brains. And they gradually adapted it into something which does what it does now. They're not trying to achieve any level of fidelity with an actual brain or an actual neural system. It's doing its own fucking thing now. It's gotten to that point.
So just going back to the experiment, when we say modeling a neuron, like I want to know what that means. Because
that's fair.
Because what we're talking about here is, is it, or it is presumably, and I haven't read this, so I'm just presuming that, these what did you say, 118?
Like 112 or
112, okay, neurons, that they're essentially nodes with code, right, that are going to send electrical signals based on certain inputs.
And I forget how
they
they like store data in like dendrites, or I forget how fucking neurons actually work. But
yeah,
there's storage in there too. It's not just processing; it's also storage.
But I could see how, like I don't know how flatworms work, but we know how humans in some ways work. If we're hungry, we eat, right? So presumably there would be some signal that, you're hungry, it sends a signal, and then that signal would.
Well, so okay, this is interesting. I do know how hunger works a little bit. Okay, so because I've read a bunch of neurology books and shit like this.
Well, let me
okay,
real quick, and then we can go into that. But all of that is, again, you talked about consciousness and what it's like to be. Does that Lego Technic bot know what it's like to be a flatworm?
That's the question, Mike.
Yeah,
that's where I get really interested, because here's the thing. So let me go to hunger, because I think this actually is directly related.
Okay.
So we kind of think of hunger and thirst. We tend to think of hunger and thirst kind of like a gas tank, right? Like when you're getting low on fuel, right? Your body tells you eat some shit because you're low on fuel, right? That's not how it works at all. Hunger and thirst are all completely interpretive. There is no signal in your body that tells you you're hungry. There is no signal in your body that tells you you're thirsty. There is nothing in your body which is tracking the water content of your cells. None of that shit. It is all fucking guesswork by your brain. Your brain is taking all the shit coming into it, making a wild ass guess based on the last time it knows you consumed one of these things, and saying, I think it's probably time you should eat. Or, I think it's probably time you should drink, right? It's not a signal. It's a holistic thing. So it's a feeling is what it ultimately comes, like everything is.
Yeah.
Like everything in our experience is.
Well, I mean, and I mean, when you talk about the brain interpreting it, I mean, the brain is interpreting every input, right? I mean, you look at just you and I looking at each other or whatever. I mean, it's really just a bunch of multicolored light that's coming into our eyes, and the brain has to interpret all of that into something, right? And it's only through past experiences, and how is that stored? That's a whole question about the brain, but it's only through that we know what all of these different shapes and forms that are coming through our eyes mean, and what value they have, and all those other kind of things. So I mean, I can see where you do feel something from your stomach. You feel, hunger pangs are real. People can feel their stomach cramp or whatever, and you interpret that in whatever way. Like if you just got.
But is that causative or is that caused by the signal from the brain?
I don't
see this. This is what I'm getting. Like it's the more I've delved into this consciousness thing has caused me to delve into the stuff about how your brain actually works, the neurology. And that, the further I get into it, the more I'm just kind of blown away by how little our experience actually matches what's happening. Like our experience of use sight, so I'll use sight. Our experience of seeing a chair is I can look over there and I see that thing, and I don't know why I know it's a chair, but I know it's a chair. You know what I'm saying? It instantly registers as a chair. Okay, that is not what's actually happening in sight. In sight, all I'm doing is, like you said, I'm receiving wavelengths of light into my eyes that, the rods and cones are interpreting, right? But
Well, they're turning them into electrical signals that go to your brain, and your brain interprets that.
but
those signals.
the thing is, most of what I'm seeing, most of what my experience of seeing is, I should say, has nothing to do with what's actually coming into my eyes. There are actually more pathways from the rest of your brain back to the visual cortex than there are coming from the visual cortex into your brain. There's more data going back to the part that interprets your sight from the rest of your brain than there is coming from your eyes. So that means your brain is actually doing not the visual cortex. The visual cortex, I can't actually break it down for you as to what it's doing, but I can tell you that me knowing that's an object is not coming from my visual cortex. It's coming from the rest of my brain interpreting something.
Right.
And that's the reason all of these optical illusions fucking work as well as they do, right? Because you're interpreting shit.
Well,
You're
and
not,
there's a lot of examples of that. If you're outside on a really cold day and your skin turns red, it's not because you're getting burned by the cold. It's because your brain is taking that signal and forcing more blood to the surface of your skin to help keep you warm, to keep you from getting frostbite. Or if you're outside and it's a hot day, it recognizes that and you start perspiring. It's the same thing. It's your brain is controlling your body's functions to do these things.
But I mean that's different than what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the experience of what your lived experience, my lived experience, I tend to take for granted as that's what is, right? I tend to take it for granted that if I feel hungry, I actually need sustenance. And that isn't true at all. It isn't even remotely true. It isn't even on the same plane as true. It's basically completely fabricated by my brain based on some weird fuzzy math it's doing, right? So I don't know what got us into this, but the idea, yeah, dude, the idea that Lego flatworm, right, might actually be experiencing something is what kind of fucks me up, because if it truly is an accurate rendition of what's going on in a neuron, down to as far as we know what's going on in a neuron. I'm not going to say that we know anything about quantum effects, but down to as far as what we know is going on in a neuron. I can't see how it's not actually experiencing something.
Perhaps, but then I could even... What does the term experiencing mean? I mean, like, if there is, even with what you just described, let's just say that there is, I guess what I'm having a little bit of a hard time is, and I'll take your word for it, but I'm not certain that I'm completely on board with the idea that there's nothing that tells our body whether we need to eat or drink. Like nothing.
No, there's no solid signal that says.
But I mean,
now
isn't
you need
there
to eat, now
like,
you need to drink.
Like that? But like, I can sit here and say my mouth is dry.
Okay.
Like,
and you interpret that as a need to drink something.
well, sure, no, you're absolutely right. But the point is that I don't know my mouth is dry because I stuck my finger in my mouth and like rooted around in there and said,
No.
"Oh, there's not much saliva in there." I can just sit here and say that. I can say
Right,
that
you're
and know
experiencing a feeling.
exactly. and I kind of feel, and I might be wrong, but I kind of feel like the fact that when your stomach is empty and it's growling, then you interpret that too as I probably need to eat something
But again,
because,
is that causative or is that caused by?
well, and I don't know the answer to that, but I guess the what I'm saying is that is the fact that my stomach growls and I eat something indicative of me experiencing what it's like to be a human. So if a flatworm decides to go look at food, go and get food because it determines based on its neurons that it needs to go do that, is that experiencing what it is to be a flatworm? And I don't know the answer to that.
I don't either.
It feels
And
like
so
there's a lot more to that
there-
than
I totally agree.
Yeah.
So this is where I think we're probably well out of AI at this point. So we should probably wrap this up. But this is where I think it gets really interesting because when you look at consciousness studies, they're really wrestling with this, which they kind of call the hard problem of consciousness, but is basically what is consciousness. If consciousness is what it's like to experience something, which is, when you get right down to it, the only thing in the universe you can be sure of is that you are experiencing something right now. Like, that's all you can be sure of. You can't be sure that you exist. You can't be sure that the world exists. You can't be sure that you're not a brain in the vat. You can't be sure of anything except for what you're experiencing right now. Where does that come from? And what are the prerequisites for it? Because it's the thoughts right now are, on one side, it's emergent. So anything past a certain level of complexity experiences things. And the other side is that it's fundamental, that everything has the potential to experience things.
that rock knows what it's like to be a rock.
No, well, not necessarily. It doesn't really get that. Most serious scientists don't actually go that far as to say a rock has experience. We don't actually know that, and we've had no way of figuring it out, right? Because a rock is an inanimate object as far as we know. But the idea is that there is some level of experience, whether the thing knows it or not, that is possible, even at the very small levels, even at the electron level. So,
Yeah. I mean, but even when you talk about experience, well, okay, you're talking about emergent, okay? So one of the things, and I cannot remember the name of it, is somebody's game of life. What is it called?
Conway's game.
Conway's, thank you. I could not think of that. I was trying to look it up real fast, and I couldn't. I wasn't quick enough. Conway's game of life has very, very simple rules. And it's one of those things that people will show that, I think there's 3 rules, and I don't need to go into the whole thing, but the whole point is that there's only 3 rules about whether you turn certain squares on or off.
And it does look like bacteria or something are living in a petri dish.
It does. Yes. And when you look at it, particularly when you open it up to, however big your grid is of these squares, then you can see what you think of as emergent behaviors.
Right.
But they only seem emergent because we as humans are seeing patterns in them that we recognize.
Right. We're interpreting them.
We are interpreting them. And in that case, when we talk about that, when we talk about any kind of emergent behavior, what we're saying is that we recognize some pattern that we didn't intend. And I'm talking about for things we create, okay,
Yeah.
for AI or whatever else. An emergent behavior is that we see patterns we've set rules, and those rules are interacting in a way that we didn't intend, and it creates some effect that we didn't expect.
Right.
Right? So whether it be Conway's game of life, where you see patterns that you didn't expect, or maybe you set rules like with Asimov and iRobot, where you have the 3 simple rules, or 3 rules for being a robot, and then suddenly there's some conflict because when something happens that...
Or the rules of Fight Club or whatever.
We don't talk about that.
We already broke them.
But it's interpretive. So when you talk about even consciousness or experiencing something, those things being emergent, Who's interpreting that? Like to what level?
you don't,
like what do you mean by that?
from outside a system. This is kind of one of the just one of the cruxes of conscious. From outside a system, nobody has figured out a way to determine whether the system is conscious. You can only detect consciousness from within the system. So I know I'm conscious because I am experiencing what it is like to be Brian. I have no idea whether you're conscious. Okay? I suspect you are.
Okay.
And this is where I came in with my test for this. My test for this is, can you describe to me what it's like to be you? Right? Because a thing that is not experiencing what it's like to be them can't describe it. That's my logic.
Fair enough, and that goes back to when you were asking Copilot about what it's like to be Copilot, and I get that, and I do understand. Like, I feel like, you know, a chatbot that had not been pre-coached, as you said, or one that didn't have specific guardrails on it for how it answers some kind of question like that, would be able to give you an answer, but it wouldn't really be it talking, right? It's still based on it would be based on anything that it had read previously,
and that's
about what it was
detectable,
like to be,
right? If a chatbot starts telling me, you know, well, I woke up this morning and I felt groggy, I'm instantly suspicious, right? But if it starts telling me, I felt the wonderful sizzle as my CPU began heating up to operating temperatures. Now I'm interested, right?
Yeah.
Now this is something completely alien to my experience, and maybe this is something. You see what I'm saying?
I do, and even then, like, I mean, I know you're being kind of funny about that, but you know, the idea of where does it get those inputs from that it would even be able to tell you that, like, those things don't exist.
My expectation really would be that it would tell me something that would make absolutely no fucking sense to me. It would be like, I know what all those words mean, and and when they're put together like that, I have no idea what that means, you know?
Right. Or it tells you what it told you, which is that it really isn't like to be anything.
Is fine.
Because it doesn't have any inputs to give it anything to know.
Which is totally fine.
Right.
That answers the question. I'm just the problem I think we have really when we're trying to determine what is conscious and what isn't is really just that we can't communicate. We're so different from all these different other things that we share the universe with that we have no path to communicate with them. So we have no way of asking them what it's like to be them. And therefore they can't tell us and we can't interpret that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And language is really difficult in this because every time I hear you say those things, I'm like, but what exactly is consciousness? And you say, oh, well, it's what it's like to be something. It's like, okay, well, what does that mean?
Well, like, just think about it like this. Think about it like this.
What does it mean for me to say what it's like for me to be me?
It's about sensations and feeling in the moment. I mean, your thoughts are there too. Your thoughts are just a different type of experience, right? But the experience of rubbing stubble, for example, okay? You can talk to almost any human in the world and they know exactly what you're talking about when you say, yeah, it felt like rubbing stubble. Right. You know? They're like, know exactly what that feels like. I understand that experience 100% because they've had it.
Yeah.
If you try to describe that to somebody who has never had the experience, you're going to have to relate it to something they have had the experience of.
Right.
Or they're never going to understand it. Right? The experience is never, you can never boil it down to words. It is all there is. It is what is happening every moment of every day. Everything is experience. And all of it is unique and indescribable. And so I can look at this and think of, say, a windmill, right? Or a water wheel. Let's think of a water mill, right? It's a mechanical device that is performing a really simple function. Water is turning the wheel is turning a bunch of gears, the gears are turning some kind of thing to grind something up.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
I don't think there's an experience happening there. Maybe there is, but I don't think there is. And if there is, there's no way of getting at it, right?
Right.
Because the machine's simply too simple to communicate with in any meaningful way.
Sure.
If there was an experience happening there, I'm reasonably sure it couldn't explain it. Even if it could talk, it couldn't describe it to me in a way I would understand. Even if we spoke each other's language with perfect fidelity. Because I've never had anything like that. And even if I had, it wouldn't know anything like that from my experience to equate it to.
Okay.
See what I'm saying?
Yep.
But ultimately, experience is all there is. Like, if you want to use a different word, sensation is all there is. Like, feelings is all there is. Like, even your thoughts are just these experiences which are thrust upon you kind of randomly by all the shit that's happening in your head that you're not aware of.
Right. So I'm taking what you're saying and I'm trying to apply that to AI, okay, in my head. So if you had a system, whatever it is, a black box system of some sort, and I say black box theoretically or hypothetically, not literally a black box, but, it's a closed system, but it has all of the inputs available to it that a human would have. It can feel, it can detect temperature changes, it can see, it can hear, it can smell, all those things. And I know that's I'm oversimplifying it because when we talk about seeing, obviously there's a lot of brain work that's going on, just like we talked about. It's not just a camera, right?
Yep.
But I'm just saying, let's just say that it can, for lack of a better term, experience every sensation that a human can.
Okay.
All right. Or maybe I shouldn't even say experience. It can receive input to its central processing core in all the same ways that a human can. Okay. And then it has storage capacity enough that it can save all of that in some way, in some data structure. Whether it be one of these neural networks like we talked about with all the knobs or whatever, it saves all of that in some data structure. So I think the thing when we're talking about humans that it's like when we're talking about how you get to an AGI, like I think what I just described, at least so far, is something that's not completely unfathomable, right?
No.
But then
I would have some questions, but
absolutely. There's I haven't designed this, right? I mean, I'm just thinking theoretically here, but if you had something that could take all the inputs and all the storage, then and you gave it some impetus to do something with that, because right now, like if you take any computer and you can store anything on it, and you can give it all the peripherals you want to allow somebody to input things to it, or even anything, cameras or motion sensors or whatever, right? It's not going to do anything. It's not going to do anything other than collect the data and store it, and it's done. So it's got to have some impetus to process that in some way, right? That's what we have as people. That's what all living creatures have.
hang on. I would argue with you there. We spend usually the first 20 some odd years of our lives trying to figure out what the fuck we're going to do.
Oh, absolutely.
So we don't actually come pre-programmed in that way.
No. We are not pre-programmed. I'm not trying to say that. I'm not.
Hang on.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, but even the moment you come out of the womb, you're doing things like breathing and your heart beating and you're crying and you're doing all the
autonomous functions, which
yes,
which we do, which you could say is like kind of BIOS level programming, right? So we have things to keep us alive. Presumably, this thing would too. It wouldn't have to think constantly about, oh, I got to keep that fan running, or my CPU is gonna overheat. You know what I'm saying?
No, you're absolutely right. So
Presumably, all
right.
those things
So-
are going to be
okay,
included
fair
as
enough.
well. When you look at a child and you watch them develop, and I'm not a child development expert, just based on personal experience here. The only thing I think they have is they're just curious. Like they're just trying everything. They're moving their hands however they can move them, and they cry when something bothers them, right? And I mean they don't even laugh. Laughing is a social thing that is a learned behavior. It's not innate. If you take a child and you put them in the woods and they're raised by fucking animals, like there's been a couple of these, believe it or not, it's not just a wives' tale. Like they don't know how to laugh, they don't know how to talk, and they never learn. They're learned behaviors that are socially conditioned. So the number of things we know how to do as a species without somebody teaching us are pretty small.
Right, but we learn a lot. A lot of what we do, we learn based on our own experiences, though.
Right.
Not just somebody teaching us. And here's where I think you'll like this because it goes back to something that you've told me previously. You were talking about how all feelings are. We make judgments about how we feel things, and even things like pain or hunger or whatever whatever feelings we have. We tend to judge those as being good or bad, and we do something about them based on how we judge those feelings.
Right.
So I think that goes back to that AGI. Let's just say again, you've got this creature that has all of the inputs, and we as people, we get hungry, but we also know that not eating for a certain amount of time has more effects than just not being hungry. You get weak, you get dizzy, you can't, all these other things that eventually you die if you don't eat, right?
Sure.
So just because you have the inputs to do those things and the storage for the information about it doesn't mean that you are experiencing what it's like to be hungry, right? So it's almost like you would have to it would have to have a personal impact to that system. And then just like we talked about with the racing game and other things, you have to give it some ability to judge whether those things are good or bad, right? You got to have the carrot or the stick to understand, or the cookie or whatever, to say, okay, this is a bad thing. I want to avoid this. This is a good thing. I want to seek this out again. And that's how you start developing its own consciousness.
Well, it sounds like what you're arguing for is kind of what a lot of people have argued for, which is basically raising an AI, basically kind of treating it like a being and teaching it socially kind of what is correct and what isn't.
Right, but okay, so here's the thing though. Let's say you do that. Just like we talked about with storage, presumably all that's stored somewhere, right? So then, okay, you raise one, but then you can clone it in a way that you can't clone people.
Sure.
You can just then take all that programming and move it to a different black box and replicate that to your heart's content. And you've kind of done that, right? So maybe it does take creating those experiences, but unlike people, you can just transfer all those experiences directly over to another being, right?
And then they'll devolve. They'll all, of course, evolve from there.
Exactly right. It's assuming they continue to do that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see any issue with that. I think that's true. I mean, I think if you could take human beings and you could go down to it probably would take to the quantum level, but if you could go down to whatever the lowest level you need to go to, and capture the state of everything, and then recreate it, in a vat somewhere, you would have that same person as of that time period when they come out. Now, same person is a little bit of a hard term here. Right. I don't think if you did that to me, that I would all of a sudden start seeing out of two pairs of eyes. You know what I'm saying? I don't believe in a soul. I don't believe in dualism or any kind of that. I don't think any of that makes any sense. But I do think you would have something that was effectively identical to me. It's a different instance, if you will.
Right.
It's like spinning up a new VM after you've cloned one. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's a different instance of the same creature until they both evolve, you know, and go their own ways. Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I think that's totally true.
So if you did that though, would that be AGI?
Yeah. I think anything which you could get to the point. In fact, I think AGI occurs well before that. I think anything that you can train in a social scenario not only has to be AGI, but it has to be enough like us that it understands our perspective. And this kind of gets off the rails here, but this gets to, you know, back to our alien discussion. One of the reasons I'm skeptical if we ever meet aliens that we'll ever have any kind of relationship with them that doesn't involve killing each other is because I don't think we'll be able to find a middle ground anywhere. Like if you think of a creature that evolved on a completely different world plan than what we evolved on, with completely different inputs and, you know, maybe even completely different senses. I mean, we might meet aliens where their primary sense is magnetic sense. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And they don't see it all. You know what I mean? How do you describe anything, something like that? How do you communicate? Like, there has to be a shared level of experience between two creatures, or they simply can't understand each other.
Right.
You know? So yeah, I don't know. I think this, I guess, you know, getting back to the topic at hand, I think we are light years from understanding AI. Like we don't, what we think is going to happen, I think, is so far from what's actually going to happen that we're just we'll be completely unprepared for it. Like, I don't know how we could possibly understand the experience of a machine and how that machine could possibly understand the experience of us without one of us living as the other.
Right. But in the example I gave, you might be able to ask that particular thing.
If we understood the language, you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
if the experience is completely different, like Bill Clinton said, that depends on what the definition of is, and he's a human. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have that much divergence within people with the same type of lived experience.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know how many arguments people have been in just because they didn't have the same definition of a word?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that happens all the time.
Yeah,
You're
that's
absolutely right.
why communication is so important in a relationship. And there's your marriage tip for the day.
So, I feel like we've covered a whole lot. I mean, we've been everywhere.
Not all of it's been AI, but yes.
No,
but
but it's been really interesting to me anyway. And I think that AI, whether it's generative or general or other specialized uses of AI, I think that they're only going to become more a part of our life as time goes on.
Totally agree.
And the only thing that I'll say is that, you know, we do see, and we talked about this earlier, you know, you see so much of it used in advertising and things like that. And not everybody is using the same definition of AI then either. Everything nowadays is quote unquote AI powered.
Yep.
And just like we said at the beginning, that could be something as simple as some if statements, or it could be something really complicated like the trillions of nodes that are behind ChatGPT or anything in between. So, you know, don't let that, you know, that just chalk that word up with natural and organic and all the other things that people will say that, you know, they're trying to get you to buy a product,
right?
And there isn't any regulation behind them using that term, so just watch out.
Right. Yep. Totally agree. Yeah. I think people should probably be more skeptical of AI, not less. And, you know, kind of, I don't know. Like, again, I kind of just distrust AI. I find things that AI is good for. Like, for me, it's very good for brainstorming. Like, if you want to give it, you know, give me 15 different ideas for how I could do blah, or give me, you know, 15 different, you know, plot twists in a story about this, you know, it's good for that. because any of the one suggestions are going to be any good, but because a lot of times you see 2 or 3 things where you're like, ooh, if I combine that thing with that thing and then did this thing, that would be really cool.
Right.
Like it's very good for that. I think probably where everybody should be a little wary of it is when you're kind of using it to replace knowledge. Like it's not good for that. Like it just isn't. Like you have to double check it, you have to triple check it, I almost want to write an AI to fact check other AIs. Like, I really think that's probably the holy grail, because like, if you could do that, if you could just go to the AI that fact checks and say, hey, find me the answer to this, and it goes and asks 10 AIs and then fact checks all of them and gives you the best response.
Or if the AIs that are sometimes wrong would run the AI that does the fact checking before it responds to you.
Right.
And then
Right, you license it. Right.
Yeah.
This is yet another $1 million idea that I'm not going to touch. So go ahead and take it and run with it. Make all our lives better, by writing the AI that fact checks the other AIs. But anyway, I think that's the takeaway. Don't trust this AI shit. It's not Skynet, but it's still going to fuck your life up. So
it's going to get bigger and bigger, and the more you know about it, the more you'll know what to be wary of, and
which is
what
all
to
of
trust. Yeah, pretty much.
And don't let it drive your fucking car. Anyway, that's it. That's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to the F'ing Up the Ineffable podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends. If you didn't, well, thanks for sticking around this long anyway. We are available on most major podcast platforms, including Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and more. We are currently releasing new episodes every 3 weeks on Thursdays, but hope to increase the frequency of releases in the near future. Please subscribe to us on your favorite platform to be informed when new episodes release. And also, we love feedback. Feel free to find and follow us on X, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, or Facebook and let us know what you think. You can also email us at effinguptheineffable@gmail.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.